So we're going to dive into something that I think a lot of our listeners can relate to. Cohabitation and chores. Sharing a life can be so joyful, but sometimes the whole question of like, who does what around the house, that can get a little sticky sometimes, right?
It really can. It can be one of the biggest sources of conflict in a relationship.
Absolutely. And we've got a whole bunch of research and stories to kind of dig into today. And one thing that really jumped out at me is that younger generations seem to be way more into splitting chores equally compared to like our parents' generation.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So I'm curious, is that like a real sign of progress, or are those like, old-fashioned gender roles still kind of lurking under the surface?
Well, and that's what's fascinating, because we're not just talking about like a generational shift in attitudes here. We're talking about potentially like a total change in how relationships even work.
Right.
Like for so long, the model was pretty rigid.
Hmm.
Women handle the home, men handle the outside world. But now, with so many couples choosing to live together, whether it's before marriage or instead of marriage, those lines are getting blurrier and blurrier.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it makes me think about like that classic phrase, the second shift.
Tell me about it.
The idea that even when women are working full-time jobs,
Yeah.
they come home and they're basically starting another full-time job of housework and childcare.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you never really clock out.
Right, exactly. How do we even start to like untangle that?
Well, it's tough. It's really like a whole web of expectations that have been built up over generations.
Right.
Like way back in the 80s, this sociologist named Arlie Hochschild, she coined that term second shift to describe exactly that. And her research showed that women were putting in way more hours on housework and childcare than men, even when both partners had jobs outside the home.
Right?
And guess what? Studies are showing that that pattern is still going strong today.
Wow.
It's like these beliefs about like what's women's work and what's men's work. They're just really, really hard to shake.
Yeah, I bet those beliefs can even like creep into even the best relationships. Like you think you're starting fresh, but then suddenly, somehow you're the one doing all the laundry.
It's like magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
But not the good kind.
All right.
It's like these unconscious biases
Yeah.
just kind of sneak in there.
So is there even a way to like fully escape that?
Well, you can't just erase like years of societal conditioning overnight,
Right.
but you can definitely try to be more aware and intentional about it.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? I mean, it's easy to say like, oh, talk to each other.
Right.
But what are couples who are actually like nailing this? What are they doing?
Well, there's no like secret formula,
There's-
unfortunately.
yeah.
I know, right?
Okay.
But it really comes down to creating a space where both partners can talk about their needs and their expectations without feeling judged.
I like that.
So, instead of jumping right into like, let's divide the chores, try starting with questions like, what are your least favorite chores? Or what would make you feel appreciated when it comes to like sharing the load?
Yeah, those are good. Because it's not just about like splitting everything down the middle, is it? It's about figuring out like what each person actually likes or dislikes and what feels fair to both people.
Exactly. And that's where things get interesting, because then you start to see how like personality and even things like how you were raised start to affect the whole chore dynamic.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. How did your parents handle chores when you were growing up? Did your mom do everything? Or did your dad pitch in?
Oh, that's interesting.
Did you have assigned chores? Or was it more like everyone just did whatever?
Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that.
All those experiences can like shape what you expect in your own relationship, even if you're not aware of it.
So it's like we're all carrying around these invisible chore scripts from our childhood, and we might be trying to like impose those on our partner
Subconsciously, yeah.
without even realizing it. So
Yep.
how do we like break free from those old scripts and write a new one?
Well, first you got to become aware of the script. Once you recognize the pattern, you can start to question it.
Okay.
Ask yourself, is this really how I want to do things? Or am I just doing what I've always known?
Right.
And then talk to your partner about their experiences and expectations.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You might be surprised how different your perspectives are.
So we've got like societal expectations, personal experiences, and now we're adding like cultural influences to the mix. This is getting juicy. But I think it's important to remember that not everyone's starting from the same place, right?
Absolutely. Cultural norms can play a huge role in how we see domestic responsibilities.
Right.
Some cultures might emphasize women as a primary homemaker,
Right.
while others might encourage a more equal approach.
Okay, so how do you navigate those cultural differences?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
There's no easy answer.
right.
But one thing that successful couples seem to do is they're willing to understand and respect each other's perspectives.
Even if they don't totally agree.
Exactly. It's about being curious about where your partner is coming from and having those sometimes uncomfortable conversations
Right.
and finding ways to bridge those cultural gaps with empathy.
This is starting to paint a pretty complex picture. It's not just about like who washes the dishes or folds the laundry. It's about all these layers of expectations and experiences all colliding in a shared space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so interesting, because how a couple handles the chore division, it can tell you a lot about their communication style, their power dynamics,
Right.
and their ability to adapt and grow together.
Oh, wow.
It's like a mini version of the whole relationship.
So figuring out who does what around the house can actually be like a pathway to a deeper understanding of the relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a chance to practice those core relationship skills,
Yeah.
like listening, compromising,
Yeah.
and empathizing.
Wow, I like that.
And the better we understand those dynamics, the better we can create relationships that are truly equal and fulfilling.
Both inside and outside the home.
Exactly.
So we've talked about all the challenges, but there's another side to this whole cohabitation and chore thing
There is.
that I think is worth exploring. And it's about the potential for positive change and maybe even breaking down some of those traditional gender roles we've been talking about.
Right.
So tell me more about that.
Well, it's interesting to think about cohabitation as almost like a social experiment,
Okay.
like a chance to rewrite the rules. When it comes to relationships and how we live our lives together,
Mhm.
because let's face it, the traditional marriage model, with its very strict gender roles, hasn't exactly been a shining example of equality.
True. So are you saying that by choosing to live together, outside of those traditional structures, couples are more likely to challenge those old norms?
I think there's definitely potential there.
Okay.
When you're cohabitating, you're creating a partnership on your own terms.
Right.
You get to decide what fair and equal means for you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But let's be real. It's not like all those societal expectations just disappear the minute you move in together, right?
Unfortunately, no.
So how do couples actually make this work? How do they turn those good intentions into something that actually feels fair and sustainable?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And honestly, there's no magic formula.
Uh,
I know. But what we do see in couples who are making it work is a willingness to be flexible.
Yeah.
And to get creative.
Okay, so like ditch the rule book
Yeah, exactly.
and figure out what works for you.
Exactly.
So tell me about some of these couples.
Okay, so one couple we learned about, they use a point system.
A point system,
Yeah.
like for chores.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm listening.
So they assign points to different chores based on like how hard they are
Yeah.
and how long they take.
Okay.
And then each week they try to get a certain number of points.
But they can choose which chores they want to do.
Exactly.
That's so smart.
It takes the pressure off of having to split every single task perfectly in half
Right.
and lets people focus on what they're good at.
Or at least what they hate the least.
Exactly.
I love that.
Another couple we talked to, they have what they call a no chore left behind policy.
Okay, I like this, all right.
So they set aside 1 hour every Sunday
Huh?
to tackle all the housework together.
Okay.
They put on some music. They make it fun,
That's awesome.
like a chore power hour.
Right.
And it prevents those situations where one person feels like they're always picking up the slack.
Yeah, that's huge.
And it makes sure that everything gets done.
No more like week-old dishes in the sink.
Exactly.
Okay. What else?
Another approach we saw was dividing chores based on personality types.
Okay, that's interesting.
So this one couple, one partner was like a total neat freak.
Okay.
Loved things organized and clean. The other partner was more laid back.
Okay.
Didn't mind a little clutter.
So they actually like leaned into their differences
Exactly.
instead of trying to change each other.
Yeah, they figured, why fight it?
Right.
So the neat freak took charge of all the like organizing and cleaning,
Okay.
and the more laid back partner handled things like grocery shopping.
Yeah.
And yard work.
That's amazing.
They created a system that worked for them.
And everyone felt good about their contribution.
Exactly. Because that's a key point. Finding a system that feels fair, but also feels good.
Right. Because, let's be honest, chores aren't exactly the most fun part of living together.
Definitely not.
But when you approach them as a team
Yeah.
with respect for each other's preferences and maybe even a little bit of humor,
Exactly.
it can actually be a way to connect
Absolutely.
rather than a source of tension. I really like that idea. of turning chores into an opportunity for connection.
It's a shift in mindset.
It's like, we're in this together.
Yeah.
We're going to make this work.
Right.
And it's going to feel good for both of us.
And you know what's even more exciting? We're seeing this shift happening in real life,
Really?
especially with younger couples.
That's awesome.
They're ditching those outdated gender roles
Right.
and embracing a more collaborative approach to domestic life.
Like they're saying, forget the old script. We're writing our own. That's so encouraging. It gives me hope for the future of relationships.
Me too.
But, with all this talk about flexibility and custom design systems, is there a risk of things getting too chaotic
That's a great question.
or uneven over time?
Yeah, we'll definitely dive deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Because finding a system that works in the honeymoon phase of cohabitation is one thing,
Right.
but keeping that balance over the long haul,
Yeah.
through all of life's ups and downs, that's the real challenge.
Okay, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break.
So we were talking about how cohabitation can be like a chance to kind of rewrite the rules when it comes to relationships and chores.
Yeah, like throwing out the old playbook and starting fresh.
Exactly. Because for a long time, the traditional marriage model, with its pretty strict gender roles, it wasn't exactly a model of equality, was it?
No, not really.
So when couples choose to live together outside of that structure, they have this opportunity to define what fairness and equality really means for them.
Okay, that sounds pretty empowering. But I'm also thinking about, like, those societal expectations, they don't just magically vanish, right? Just because you sign a lease together.
Right. Those expectations can be pretty deeply ingrained.
So how do couples actually make this work in real life?
It's all about communication and being willing to adjust as you go. What works for one couple might not work for another. And what works for you now might need to change down the line.
So it's not a one-and-done conversation.
Definitely not. It's an ongoing dialogue.
Okay, so let's talk about some real-life examples.
Okay, so there's this one couple we learned about. They use a point system for chores.
Wait, a point system?
Yeah.
How does that work?
So they assign points to each chore based on like how much time it takes and how difficult it is.
Okay.
And then they each try to earn a certain number of points each week.
But they get to choose which chores they want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
It takes the pressure off of having to divide every single task perfectly in half.
Right. And it allows for some flexibility based on what people are good at, or at least what they don't mind doing.
Right.
Okay, what about other couples?
Another couple we interviewed, they have this thing they call a no chore left behind policy.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So they set aside 1 hour every Sunday, and they tackle all the housework together.
Like a chore power hour.
Exactly.
I love that.
It's like they turn chores into a team sport.
Right, and it prevents that whole thing of one person feeling like they're always picking up the slack.
Exactly.
Okay, any other creative solutions out there?
Yeah, this one's interesting. So this couple, they decided to divide chores based on their personality types.
Okay, I've never heard of that before. Tell me more.
So one partner was super organized, like a total neat freak.
Okay.
And the other partner was more laid back, didn't mind a little bit of the mess.
So instead of trying to change each other, they just embrace their differences.
Exactly. So the neat freak took charge of all the cleaning and organizing. And the more laid-back partner handled things like grocery shopping and yard work.
So they created a system that really played to their strengths.
Exactly. And they both felt good about their contributions.
That's awesome. And it brings up a really important point, right? It's not just about finding a system that's fair. It's also about finding a system that feels good.
Yeah, because let's face it, chores aren't exactly the most fun part of living together.
Definitely not.
But when you approach them with a sense of teamwork and respect for each other, and maybe even a little bit of humor,
Yeah,
it can actually become a way to connect with your partner.
I love that. Instead of being a source of conflict, it's
Right.
like shifting the whole paradigm from, I have to do chores, to like, we're in this together,
Right.
and we're going to make it work in a way that feels good for both of us.
And you know what's really exciting? We're seeing this shift happening more and more,
Really?
especially with younger couples.
Oh, that's awesome.
They're really challenging those traditional gender roles
Right.
and embracing a more collaborative approach to chores and to relationships in general.
It's like they're saying, forget the old script. We're writing our own.
Exactly.
That's so hopeful. It gives me hope for the future of relationships.
Me too.
But I'm also thinking, like, with all this emphasis on flexibility and finding what works for you, is there a risk of things becoming too chaotic or uneven over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something we'll definitely dive deeper into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, can't wait.
Because Finding a system that works in the honeymoon phase of cohabitation
Mm.
is one thing,
Right.
but keeping that balance over the long haul, through all of life's ups and downs, that's where the real work comes
The
in.
real magic.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after the break.
All right, so we've talked about all the different factors that go into dividing chores, like societal expectations, personal preferences, cultural influences. But now I want to talk about like the long game,
Hmm.
because life throws curveballs.
Right. Yeah, for sure. New babies, new jobs, just the general chaos of everyday life. How do couples make sure that sense of fairness, that balance in the chore department, how do they keep that going over time?
It's a real challenge.
It is.
So it's kind of like building a house, right?
Yeah.
You can lay a strong foundation, but if you don't do the maintenance, fix that leaky faucet every now and then,
Right.
things start to fall apart.
And it's the same with relationships, right?
Exactly. You got to keep nurturing them. Be willing to adapt
Yeah.
as things change.
So it's not like a set it and forget it situation.
Yeah, not at all.
It's more like a dance.
Yeah, a constant back and forth.
Making sure both partners feel heard and appreciated.
Exactly.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, one thing that can be really helpful is what I call scheduled recalibration.
Okay. I like that. Tell me more.
It's basically setting aside some time, maybe once a month, once a quarter, even just a few minutes each week,
Yeah.
to check in with each other about how things are feeling in the chore department.
See?
So it's not about having those conversations in the heat of the moment, when you're both stressed and the dishes are piled up.
Right. That never ends well.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's about creating a dedicated space for open and honest dialogue.
So what kinds of things do you talk about during these check-ins?
You can start by just asking each other simple questions, like how are you feeling about the chore balance this week?
Okay.
Is anything feeling overwhelming or unfair?
Right.
Is there anything we need to adjust or switch up?
Yeah, those are good questions. And I imagine these conversations change as the relationship changes too, right?
Absolutely.
Like if one person gets a new job with longer hours, or if you have a baby.
Yeah, or if a family member gets sick and needs extra care.
Right. Life happens.
Exactly. And your chore system needs to be able to adapt to those changes.
So it's not about one person dictating terms. It's about working together as a team
Exact.
to find a solution that works for both of you.
And that might change over time.
Right.
It's about recognizing that fairness doesn't always mean a perfectly even split.
Okay, so what does it mean?
It means finding a balance that feels equitable to both partners.
Hmm.
Even if one person ends up doing a little bit more in one area
Okay.
and the other person picks up the slack in another area.
Right. It's about looking at the big picture.
Exactly. And recognizing that everyone has different strengths and weaknesses.
And preferences too.
Yes, definitely.
Like maybe one person hates doing laundry, but they're a whiz in the kitchen, while the other person would rather clean the bathroom than cook dinner.
Exactly. And it's totally okay to lean into those preferences.
As long as both partners feel valued and appreciated for what they're doing.
Exactly.
And I bet a little bit of gratitude goes a long way here too, right?
Absolutely.
Just taking a moment to acknowledge and appreciate what your partner's doing.
It makes a huge difference.
Even if it's something small, like taking out the trash or unloading the dishwasher.
It shows that you're paying attention,
Yeah.
that you're grateful for their effort.
Right. And it reinforces that sense of being a team.
Exactly.
We're in this together.
And I think that brings us to a really important point. This whole conversation about chores, it's not really just about chores, is it?
No, I don't think so.
It's about so much more than that.
Like what?
It's about how power is negotiated in a relationship, how respect is shown, how well you communicate with each other.
It's like a microcosm of the whole relationship.
Exactly.
So it's about creating a relationship where both partners feel seen and heard,
And valued.
not just for the tasks they complete, but for who they are as people.
Beautifully said.
So to wrap things up, we've learned that dividing chores in a cohabiting relationship is about way more than just splitting tasks. It's about communication, respect, and finding what works for you as a couple.
And remembering that fairness doesn't always mean a perfectly even split.
Right. It's about finding a balance that feels equitable and sustainable.
And being willing to adjust that balance as life changes.
Because let's face it, life is messy and unpredictable.
That's for sure.
But with open communication and a commitment to working together, couples can create a chore system that supports their relationship and helps them thrive both individually and as a team.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into cohabitation and chores. We hope you learned something new and maybe even got inspired to have some of those important conversations with your partner.
And remember, there's no right or wrong answer. It's all about finding what works for you and your unique relationship.
Thanks for listening, everyone.